just about 2 miles away from us tomorrow, chaired by Rowan Douglas from Willis Research. And we've been invited to go down there, and we will be there. And in the afternoon, we may be taping some interviews that will be playing for you later in the week. There'll be a number of people from the modeling industry, as well as Franklin Nutter, our old friend, the president of the Reinsurance Association of America. The stock market is down now about 100 points. All eyes are focused on the House Financial Services Committee. Our eyes are going to the commercials. Private forecaster AccuWeather.com said this morning that it expects 4 tropical storms to strike the U.S. coastline during the 2009 Atlantic hurricane season. The hurricane season begins on the 1st of June. AccuWeather's chief forecaster Joe Bastardi said the greatest risk this year may be to the U.S. East Coast, but that a storm in the oil-rich Gulf of Mexico could not be ruled out. Forecaster Bastardi said, quote, "I do think the eastern seaboard will need to watch more than normal. The Gulf of Mexico is much less active than in the past, but that doesn't mean we can't get something together in the Gulf." Bastardi's weather forecast can have tremendous sway over U.S. energy market traders' outlook for national supply and demand. Mr. Bastardi forecasts 3 of the storms striking the U.S. coast to be hurricanes, with one, a major hurricane, packing winds of at least 111 miles an hour. That would be a Category 3 storm. AccuWeather's forecast is in line with those of other meteorologists, which expect reduced activity compared with 2008. Of course, no description of forecasts on hurricanes would be complete without that of Dr. Ken Gray from Colorado State University. His forecast, issued at the end of December, calls for 14 named storms, including 7 hurricanes, 3 of which are expected to become Category 3 or stronger, which is 2 more than Mr. Bastardi's. Speaking of hurricanes, down in Florida, the CFO of the state, Alex Sink, has sent out a very strongly worded letter to key legislative leaders saying that they need to start making some smart decisions on reducing the risk for Florida property owners from hurricanes. One of the things that she said is that they should authorize the cabinet to shop for reinsurance in the fall instead of the spring, to take advantage of more favorable market conditions. She also asked lawmakers to continue a small $20 million program as an incentive for citizens to make home improvements that make homes less susceptible to wind damage. A spokesman for the Insurance Commissioner, Kevin McCarty, said that he supports any viable solution that will further his efforts during these difficult economic times. CFO Sink said that the $28 billion exposure to the Florida Hurricane Cat Fund should be incrementally cut back, and that the state-backed Citizens Insurance Corporation should be reduced to the role of insurer of last resort. Citizens, however, now has more than 1 million Floridians insured at below market rates. Ms. Sink said that Florida's hurricane risk represents one of the largest catastrophic risk exposures in the world. That's certainly an understatement. The Swiss Re Sigma report is out. This is the annual report on reinsurance claims. And Cyclone Nargis and the Sichuan earthquake made last year one of the worst for disasters since 1970. This is in terms of lives lost and economic damage. Some 240,500 people lost their lives in natural and man-made disasters in 2008. Most people died in Asia, where Cyclone Nargis killed 138,000 people when it hit Myanmar last May. Of course, the earthquake in Sichuan province in China claimed 70,000 lives at least. The death toll for 2008 was one of the highest in decades. More people died only in 1970 and 1976. With a tropical storm in the Bay of Bengal and the 1976 Tianjin, China earthquake. Swiss Re put the economic damage caused by disasters last year at $269 billion, with the Sichuan earthquake accounting for almost half of that. Insured losses amounted to $52.5 billion, more than three-quarters of which occurred in the U.S. Early this morning, police ended up fighting with students in the Montmartre section of Paris. Apparently, police in riot gear charged groups of students after around 150 young people carried out acts of vandalism. Several streets were littered with broken glass after the windows of a supermarket and two banks were smashed. Students said a university night attended by some thousands of students near the Sorbonne got out of hand after a group decided to hold spontaneous demonstrations in the streets. Police converged on the students. They were met by salvos of bottles. Yesterday, some 200 students had occupied part of the French capital's Institute of Political Studies to protest inequalities in higher education. In Australia, a minor earthquake struck the southern Australian state of Victoria and was felt in the state's capital of Melbourne this morning. This is the second such earthquake in a matter of weeks. The tremor occurred at 4:30 p.m. local time. It was 4.6 on the Richter scale. It shook building in Melbourne's central business district and was felt in the city's suburbs. There was no damage. Melbourne is a pretty big city. An earthquake measuring 4.7 on the Richter scale was felt in Melbourne back on March 6th. And Royal Dutch Shell confirmed yesterday that U.S. regulatory authorities have in fact launched a bribery probe into its activities. According to the group's 2008 annual statement, Shell is currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Department of Justice for violations of the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It said that Shell has an ongoing internal investigation and is cooperating with the government authorities, and notes that with these U.S. investigations, Shell may face fines and additional costs. The investigation apparently is regarding Shell's use of the freight forwarding firm Panalpina Incorporated, as well as potential U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violations as a result of that use. Well, it's been about 2 months now, and you might have been wondering where he's been. Well, he resurfaced yesterday. Here he is. This, of course, is the 43rd President of the United States, former President George W. Bush. Last night, speaking in Calgary, Canada. He made his first public appearance since leaving office on January 20th. Sort of interesting to see him, and we'll go over a little bit of what he discussed. He said that he will not criticize Barack Obama because the new U.S. president, quote, deserves my silence. He said he plans to write a book about the 12 toughest decisions he made in office. He said, I'm not going to spend my time criticizing President Obama. He has plenty of critics in that arena. He deserves my silence. He said he wants Obama to succeed and said it's important that he has that support. Bush said, I love my country a lot more than I love politics. I think it's essential that he be helped in office. The former president said he plans to give 10 speeches in Canada, Asia, and Europe. You notice none of them are in the United States. The speech in Calgary last night was the first one. The event was billed as, quote, a conversation with George W. Bush. According to the Washington Speakers Bureau, which apparently is his agent, the former president is offering his thoughts on 8 years in the Oval Office, the challenges facing our nation in the 21st century, the power of freedom, the role of faith, and other pressing issues. Some guests apparently paid more than $300 U.S. to attend the lunch. However, outside, more than 200 protesters chanted "war criminal" and had amassed shoes from across Canada to